In the darkness of the night, I felt rather than saw something huge coming at me with frightening inevitability. Earth. Straightening my legs, tensing my body, I hit the soft ground, tangled my boots in the thicket, fell on my side. I didn't have to pull up the slings and extinguish the parachute dome in the calm air. The light silk smoothly settled on the bushes. I must have landed in a hollow or even in a ravine. A brook was babbling away, and the damp earth smelled of stale grass and decay. I got up, unbuckled the carabiners on the straps in one fell swoop, dropped the suspension system, looked around. Nothing could be seen. The silence ringing in my ears, and no signs of life. I assembled the dome, hastily rolled it up, squeezed it into the satchel and covered it with my bag. Cautiously stepping on shaky bumps, avoiding bushes, I reached the slope covered with thorny bushes. If he went straight ahead, he would make a lot of noise. I turned along the ravine, hoping to find a more comfortable ascent. I thought, while I'm wandering here, the guys will gather and leave. I felt uneasy. I stopped and listened. The airplanes were buzzing overhead. It means that the landing is not finished. It means that the guys are on the ground, extinguishing the domes. And what if they are on the opposite side of the ravine, and I'm going to the wrong place? They haven't entered the battle yet. Not a single shot has been heard. At least one I would immediately find them. Suddenly there were faint rustles, inaudible voices. I was glad and at the same time wary. Are the paratroopers lurking? But then why aren't they signaling? You don't signal yourself, I realized, and reached for the flashlight hanging on my chest. Without ceasing to watch the place where the voices had come from, I finally saw something like the edge of a ravine. Heads were moving over the edge. Again there came a muffled voice. It was German. I froze, feeling my heart start and fall somewhere. My legs were aching from the heavy load. The straps of the radio station and the bag crashed into my shoulders, but I was afraid to move so as not to give myself away by any careless movement. I wish I had honked, I thought frantically. A dark, vague figure rose, and a flickering stream of fire burst out. A meter away, a hand machine gun rumbled. I involuntarily sat down. The ringing, rolling echo echoed in the ravine and in my heart. I was thrown into a fever at the thought that the other machine guns of the Germans were about to fire, but they were silent. Maybe the other calculations were waiting for the paratroopers to respond. What to do? To sit like this, squatting, and see how they were firing through the ravine at ours was beyond all strength. The machine gun was beating in short and long bursts, so one single machine gun, right in front of me. Shall I hit it with a machine gun? But how many fascists are there? You can't destroy them all at once, but you'll find yourself, and then it's the end. And grenades? How do you know where they came from? While the surviving Germans will recover from panic, you can crawl away, even run away and lie down behind the bumps or in some hole, if there is any. I grasped this thought and did not look for a more suitable solution. I bite the ring with my teeth and pulled the pin. Will I or won't I? A sharp throw of my whole body forward, and the grenade flew toward the rumbling machine gun, and I fell down on the wet grass. There was an explosion. I felt as if a furious beast had rushed over me with a terrible roar. The echo was so deceptive. There was silence. No screams, no moans. And the most surprising thing was that no one fired back, neither on the left nor on the right. If the Germans were still up there, they would probably have given something away. I rushed to the bottom of the ravine, ran across the stream, and climbing up the gentle slope, found myself in a clearing. In the darkness flickered calling lights. They were moving to the left toward the forest. I was so happy, as if they were the twinkling lights of a peaceful village, where I could find a warm welcome and a quiet night's lodging. In the distance I could clearly hear the sound of stomping. There was a rustling above my head, and something heavy fell to the ground a few steps away from me. A paratrooper. I went to the blurred, barely recognizable stain of a parachute. The man was grunting. The spot began to shrink. I added a step and, face to face with a dark figure, recognized Kobziv, the commander of the radio squad. Vasily, you? That's him. Where are ours? I have no idea. All right, we'll find them, resolutely said Kobzev, taking the parachute on his back. Soon we met another paratrooper. Have you seen the green light, friend? I asked. It seemed to blink once, but I did not catch where. The headquarters of the 1st Battalion of the 3rd Airborne Brigade was located near a haystack. Already gathered radio operators and telephonists. Everyone is excited, but talk with a contrived indifference. No one wants to admit what they have just experienced. How did you fall behind, Tarasov? Lieutenant Komisarov, the commander of the communications platoon, asked me, addressing me as you for the first time. He was a little older than us young guys. Shrugging my shoulders and feeling the pain in them, I took off the package of the radio and, trying to appear calm, answered. Carried to the ravine, and there were Germans with a machine gun. A grenade came to my rescue. On my shoulder lay Komisarov's heavy hand. So it's you? Battalion Commander Nikishchenko, tall, slender, with a cheekbone face and Mongolian cut eyes, and Deputy Commander Dorokin half sitting looking at the map in the weak light, and heard this conversation. Nikishchenko ordered to send scouts, noting, "We should have brought the documents." It is easy to say to seize, I thought, and turned to him. Comrade Guards Captain, permission to show the place. From the darkness, someone objected. We'll manage without escorts somehow. We've got a moustache ourselves. The scouts soon returned. A big, burly man handed the documents to the commander, reported. 3. A soul out of all of them. The machine gun is not good. They found a passenger car on the road. They started it and drove it under the slope into the ravine. A ray of light slipped on the papers of the dead, reflected on the oval face of a scout with a lush moustache. So that's who didn't want to take me as my escort, Igorov. I was with him at the last exercise. Then this hero complained about the bumpy road, said that the scout should walk through the forest on foot, not drive a car. Nikishenko, looking through the documents of the dead, perplexed, hummed. Quite strange. According to the information we have, such a part in this area should not be. Dorokin delved into the map. These Germans are probably passing through here. Here it is, the road behind the ravine, he said thoughtfully. They noticed us, decided to frighten us, or wanted to attract the attention of their own. 3 of us firing at a landing party is extremely reckless. But what doesn't happen in war? He was wearing the same leather jacket that he had worn in the camp, but instead of a cap on his head sat a helmet with ears bent upward. I regarded Dorokin with awe, perhaps because his name was surrounded by an aura of mystery. Indeed, why was he alone, a senior lieutenant, allowed to break the uniform? On his tunic he glistened with the Order of the Red Banner. But the orders were worn by other officers, older than him in rank, and dressed as they should. The army is the army. There were rumours. As if once in the plane just before the ejection of Dorokin's parachute unravelled. Everyone jumped off. He packed the dome and threw himself overboard. He landed in the village right on the Germans' heads. He threw grenades into the windows, raised panic, shot almost all the ammunition, and went into the forest unharmed. Only on the 2nd day he managed to find his own men. Before the paratroopers appeared the same Dorokin, but as the guys claimed, all grey. Indeed, when he came to our classes and took off his cap, the bright grey hair was unusual to cut the eyes, because it did not fit with his age. Dorokin never told us about himself, thus causing us young paratroopers even more curiosity. Anyway, we considered him a hero. And now, from the whole appearance of this man, was a feeling of confidence and strength, as if he was not in the rear, and on the other side of the front line, where everyone is his own and do not have to look back. From the darkness appeared a young Lieutenant Savinov, chief of staff with a group of people. They were company commanders and individual platoon commanders. Please, everyone closer, said Nikishenko. Before dawn an hour. In an hour we must remove from the landing site for 5 kilometers. Check again, whether well-camouflaged parachutes, and on the road exactly to the north. The commanders are gone. Someone took me by the elbow, a habit of Vladimir Soknev, and whispered in my ear. "Happy baptism of fire, Maximik. It's a pity we didn't get into the ravine together. We would have made a lot of noise. How naive that Vovka is." I grinned. "Don't be sorry. Give time, and you'll be christened." Muffled commands sounded. "Prepare to move." In the forest hid scouts, groups of combat guards, and stretched there, like a black yawn, a continuous line of people. The night under the shade of trees is full of hidden fear. I knew that at such a time the Germans would not go into the forest. Having heard the airplanes, the cleansers most likely do not let go of their phones, reporting to all ends about the landing of the Soviet paratroopers. But still the feeling was as if the enemies were hiding behind trees and bushes and waiting for the command fire. People were walking in silence, bending under the weight of the burden, only to hear dry leaves rustling under their feet. They stopped. Nikishenko asked what was the matter. Suddenly the silence was broken by a husky, as if damp but sharp enough voice. "Razmaznya, are you blind? Didn't you see what you were holding on to?" I froze in anxious wariness. The usual rude soldier's words struck a nerve. "I didn't do it on purpose," someone said in despair. "I held on to my comrade's back. He climbed under that snag and went I don't know where. I didn't realize that my hand was on the driftwood. I thought it was his back." I thought. The turkey was thinking too. It turned out that the guide had accidentally gotten separated from the group, and now no one knew where to go. A flashlight flashed on, picking out from the darkness a colourful circle of dried leaves. There was no sign of them. The people stomped around in indecision. Shouting was forbidden. "Move aside." And then I saw the radio operator Goshka Popov, a lanky, thin guy, an inveterate hunter, who, according to his stories, had travelled thousands of kilometres through the Siberian taiga. Who counted them? Kilometres. But we believed because Goshka loved the forest, felt at home in it, never used a compass, skillfully built a fire, even in inclement weather, and could do many other things, surprising us with his cleverness. Goshka knelt down, bent threefold, scattered the leaves, and said to Vasily Kobzev, who bent down to him with a flashlight, "Lower the light, but hurry up." His fingers cautiously felt the ground and came across an indentation from a heel. Having examined it, Popov showed his hand, "That's where we should go." In a minute or two, a light flashed intricately in the thicket. The paratroopers rushed to catch up with the column. To keep up with the headquarters, I had to run. From behind there was a stomping sound. Someone, breathing heavily, grumpily said, "Hey, buddy, tell your superiors that mortars with slabs on their hump can't run." Before I opened my mouth, Savinov said combat. Nikishchenko, and indeed people have the impression that everyone is running. "What do you suggest?" "Report to the head of the column to stop. Otherwise we will lose people." "We'll do it. Just be warned, if we don't get out of this square before dawn, we'll be swatted by the Air Force." Dawn came quickly. Everything was dark, and suddenly from above grey spots seeped through the branches. The outlines of trees with shaggy hats became visible. This was reassuring. The leaves left on the branches would shelter them from the airplanes. Next to Nikishenko was Igorov in a stained robe. On the move, he reported. Ahead is a dirt road that leads to Krasnyanka. Before the village with a kilometre. In front of the village a large wasteland, well viewed. In the vegetable gardens the enemy is digging trenches in our direction. There is no movement on the road. A field telephone cable is laid along the roadside. We didn't break it, as agreed. That's all for now. Good. Continue surveillance. Igorov saluted and disappeared as inconspicuously as he had appeared. The forest thinned out, it became quite light. Tighten up, came from the front of the restrained command. Wider step. Nikishenko ordered to make a halt to pull up the battalion, but no one had to sit or lie down. Barely appeared trailing column of paratroopers, as Nikishenko again approached Igorov, threw his hand to his temple. All is calm, Comrade Guards Captain. Commanders raised units, dispersed along the road. Come on, softly said Nikishchenko and vigorously waved his hand. The men rushed forward, ran across the road, climbed the hillside and took cover under the yellow tents of trees. At this time the growing noise of engines was heard from the west. Without seeing anything yet, I determined from the whining, dragging sound airplanes, and I was not mistaken. The ranks erupted. Air. Air. Everyone lay down. Over the forest, in which there was no longer a single person, flew brown Junkers accompanied by silver Messerschmitt. Behind the village, in a spill of scarlet, they turned and flew back, rearranging themselves into a broken chain. Covered by twigs and leaves, I lay under a tree and watched the play of airplanes. The front machine, like a kite on the prey, dived down. Bombs fell. Now we're dead, Sochnev said in a broken whisper. Such a fool falls it can blow his head off. I glimpsed at his good-natured, but full of anxiety face. Don't die before your time. These bombs are not ours, I said with the look of a connoisseur, although I had never been to the front and landed in the rear for the first time. Junkers one after another dive and, having dropped the load easily and swiftly, like birds in a race, soared up. Over the sea of forests flashed smoke whirlwinds and crackling thunder, two narrow, fast Messerschmitts, with black crosses on the fuselages, and on the wings with a ringing flashed along the road. Even the trees above the heads of the paratroopers indignantly rumbled, shaking their branches, sprinkling the ground with multicoloured rain. The planes appeared again, bombing and shooting the empty forest closer to the road. The rumble of explosions was deafening. The tremors of the earth became more tangible. The whirlwinds of cold air brought the odour of acrid burning. Sochnev touched my elbow. Why are we lying down? While they are throwing bombs there, you can run 2 kilometers. His eyes, green as a cat's, were running restlessly around. On his tanned forehead at the edge of his helmet, there was evaporation. Sochnev was not a timid man, but he was fidgety by nature. He was always fidgeting, in a hurry. I often teased my friend, but now it was not to jokes, and I angrily threw. You're a smart ass. Try to stand up. They'll give you lives. Tarasov. Komisarov shouted from behind a tree and shook his head sternly and judgmentally. I looked reproachfully at Sochnev, rested my face against my hands, and at the same moment felt that my head felt as if it were filled with lead. After a sleepless night, I suddenly felt lazy, indifferent to everything. I was deathly sleepy. I vaguely heard the commanders talking in a low voice, and glumly looked into space, seeing a group of bombed planes. Shall we raise the battalion? Savinov suggested. The Germans will not bomb the road, but they can comb the area near it, as if not to catch us. Nikishchenko and Dorokin agreed was with the Chief of Staff and moved, throwing off the leaves, but at this time high in the sky, emerging from the grey clouds, hovered Henschel. The appearance of an aerial scout did not bode well. I knew from the frontline soldiers that the frame this ubiquitous scout, having detected the enemy on the ground, fires quite accurately. The drowsiness was lifted like a hand. Not otherwise, the Germans are up to something. There was a muffled murmur. Again from the west. Gradually the noise grew, and the clanking of tracks was clearly distinguished. To the battle, shouted Nikishchenko. Do not open fire without my command. Yellow bumps rustled, and swayed. The communicators grabbed their automatic rifles and pouches with unusual haste. Komisarov warned. Calm down, guys. Paratroopers everywhere, like moles in a hole, hid under leaves and branches, and I imagined that on all this hillock there was no one but me alone. Clutching my automatic, I agonized with the anticipation of impending danger. Above the forest, barely touching the tops, airplanes flashed by with a wild roar. The air was filled with shrill whistling, and howling the terrific force of the blows seemed to open the ground. Trees fell down with a deafening crack, clouds of leaves torn from branches and lifted from the ground. The splinters split the bark on the thick trunks, knocking out splinters. I clasped my head tightly with my hands, protecting myself from the blows of falling branches and clods of loam, and I was ready to crawl into the ground myself, not to see and not to hear this rumbling and burning hell. At times he felt the pain of his convulsed body, pain in his ears, gasping for air like a fish thrown ashore. And at that moment an ominous motorcade of a tank with a closed hatch and 3 armoured personnel carriers followed the road toward the village. After silence had settled, I lay motionless for some time. My body softened, did not obey my consciousness. I wanted to get up, to shake off the weight of the experience a man is better in motion. And the frame was still hanging. Someone's voice cut the ear. Henschel circled for another 20 minutes, descended over the landing site, spiraled above the forest, flew over the road, veering to the right and left. Having described a circle, went to the west. The paratroopers did not get up, fearing that a new frame would appear. In the sky floated clouds. "Stand down," commanded Nikishchenko. "Prepare to march." All night I slept like a dead man. In the morning, having covered the guys scattered in their sleep with a cloak tent, I got out of the tent. After yesterday's exhausting march, my joints were still aching, but I didn't feel tired. Only my throat was dry. I took a kettle and a flask and went to get some water. Under the pines in disorder, like large anthills, grew a lot of huts. They finished building the headquarters dugout. Telephonists, unwinding the coils, brought to it the telephone cable connecting the headquarters with the companies. I asked the paratroopers digging a deep crevice where to get water, and they pointed out a path. The path led me to a mowing field with dead, tangled grass, in some places scorched by the flames and black from the soot of the explosives. There were clods and scatterings of fresh earth. I counted 6 craters. All of them must be levelled to turn the mow into a landing site. It will not be easy for the sappers. In the thick bushes I found a spring with water as clear as glass. I knelt down and leaned over the bowl with my hands on the rocks. Pine needles and pebbles were lying at the bottom. Fountains were playing, tossing grains of sand from place to place. The reflection of a sleepy face rippled on the transparent surface. I touched the icy water with my lips and took short gulps to drink to my heart's content. Then I dipped my face, stood up, wiped myself with a handkerchief, filled the kettle and flask and returned to the hut. Goshka Popov, in an unbuttoned jacket, with his helmet pinned back of his head, was chopping dead wood for the fire with an axe. His face with fine features had become gaunt, his nose pointed, his eyelids swollen and reddened. I put the kettle on the grass, threw the flask into the hut. "Hello, Goshka. How did you sleep?" "My very best. I slept like a dog. It wouldn't be a bad idea to continue, but I have to prepare food." He stacked the kindling and logs, slipped the firewood, took out a copper lighter from his pocket, flicked the lid, and, making sure that the lower limbs were on fire, began to hammer the prepared slings into the ground with an axe. I sat down and put my arms around my knees. The Germans maimed the mowing, I said, and pushed the log with the toe of my boot. "Never stir the fire until it is burning," Popov said in an instructive tone, standing upright. "Look how the flame reaches for every twig. And you don't let it go. Crippled, you say. The whole neighbourhood must have been bombed. The Germans are looking for us. They're blocking our routes, even from the air." Sochnev's scraggly head peeked out of the hut. He came out, naked from the waist down, in pants and boots. "Ours to yours." He stretched sweetly, looked around, and exclaimed in a bass voice, "Ooh. In one night, you see, we have built a whole camp. We've stopped for good. Maximik, pour some water for me. I'll at least rinse my face." They moved aside. Sochnev shuddered, groaned, shook his head, sniffed, ran to the tent to get a towel. Stocky, broad-chested, he rubbed his dense body with pleasure. The biceps of his arms were rolling, and spoke in a bass voice. I thought we'd take the village. It was right in the palm of my hand. After landing, straight into battle, as we were taught. But it turned out differently. We walked 100 kilometers and were not in battle. Not even 100 kilometers. I objected, taking out breadcrumbs and concentrates from my duffel bag. Go the same way with fresh strength, you'll lose half of it. In the village we would, as you can drink, we'd be rattled. You can't use planes, tanks, armoured personnel carriers. That's true, agreed Sochnev. But how I'd like to take at least one settlement. To take, and tell people you are free. Popov was stirring up in a cauldron a medley of mashed pea soup. He threw it down glumly. That's what we've come for, he said with such intonation that I felt something unspoken in his words, but I didn't bother to clarify it was said correctly. Kobzev came out of the tent in a cloak tent thrown over his shoulders. The helmet pulled tightly over his head emphasized the roundness of his pimply face with light blue eyes. "Why did you start the fire?" he asked sternly. "Everybody burns." "What about us, redheads?" Popov replied and rolled upward his speckled grey eyes. "The sky is about to leak. You don't have to worry. No one will hurt you." A glimpse at the dense clouds. Kobzev said nothing and went with a heavy step to the headquarters dugout. "Vasily's soul is in pain," Sochnev muttered. He was moaning in the morning. He kept calling for his mother. "Where in the Urals will you find her now? The Urals are big. At a time like this, you see, no one will answer a request. It's hard for the boy." "We have good people in the Urals," I said. "They won't leave him in trouble. When the war is over, he'll find his mother." Squinting at the smoke, Popov was baking fritters on a sapper spatula. He greased it with mixed fat, poured the mess, and put it on the coals. "Everyone has his own," he sullenly exhaled, taking the spatula in his other hand. "Put on the soup, and I'll treat you to my cooking." "Fire me," I said. "I've had enough once. On a camping trip I touched every puddle." Popov smiled slyly. "They're salted badly, that's for sure, but you can eat them." In the afternoon, Komisarov called me and Sochnev. There was no place to turn around in the small, low tent, where we did not enter, but climbed in one by one. A cloak tent was spread on the ground, 2 bags in the headboard, helmets on the limbs. "How are you feeling?" Komisarov asked, looking at us on our knees with a questioning look, as we could not stand up. I realized that the conversation will be serious. Before being thrown to the rear, the platoon leader was also interested in the health of each communicator. After exchanging a glance with Sochnev, I answered, "I'm fine." "Then listen." Komisarov took a piece of paper out of his clipboard and handed it to me. "Here are the data of radio communication. Set the transmitter and receiver according to them, and burn the piece of paper. At 2100 report to the commander of the 3rd Company, Guards Senior Lieutenant Gorbunov. You must ensure the company's stable communication with the battalion headquarters." At the appointed hour, we were in Gorbunov's spacious hut. It was a man already in his old age, on the forehead baldness, hair sprinkled with grey. He had just dismissed the platoon commanders and, poking his finger into a map tucked into a clipboard, was telling the officer who had been delayed, "We will ride the road here and hit the enemy as soon as he equals us, and your task is to cut off his escape routes. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," said the officer and left the hut. Gorbunov put on a raincoat helmet, threw the strap of binoculars behind his neck, and, heading for the exit, said, "Quite glad to see you, radio operators. We'll take the exam, my lovebirds." I could not find anything to answer his strange words, and Sochnev was silent. Platoon commanders came up to him at rest stops, and he usually started the conversation like this. "And now, Ivan Sergeyevich, tell me, my dear fellow, how is your army doing?" The army was doing quite well, and the satisfied Gorbunov, with his leg as usual, opened a clipboard on his knee. Apparently the soldiers and officers were used to his civilian manners and did not notice them or pretended not to notice them. In any case, they addressed him and answered his questions as military men should, without a hint of panache. I learned that before the war Gorbunov had taught math at school, and that his eldest son was at the front. Before dawn we passed the forest. There was a chill in the air. Ahead, in the dark outlines of something unclear, faintly outlined a wide expanse, embraced by silence and serenity. Gorbunov himself stood for a while, as if stumped, looking into something invisible and listening to the silence, then ordered the platoon commanders to position their units along the edge of the forest and to entrench. The men began to move, and soon there were muffled blows of blades, grunts, and restrained talking from everywhere. We were digging a cell at a distance from the others, under a thick pine tree, carefully chopping roots, throwing earth and stones on the berm. Both of us were getting hot and did not immediately notice that the sky had thrown off its black veil. It had become light. Sticking the shovel into the berm, I looked around. As far as the eye could see, the paratroopers were lying on the hillock in freshly dug cells, finishing their camouflage. The knoll sloped gently down to the grey highway, and beyond it ran a narrow, quiet rivulet, over which leafless willow thickets hung limply. A dozen or two thick yellow oaks, scattered across the vast field, looked like lonely, lost wanderers, for beyond the field there was a whole grove of oaks, lavishly coloured by the hand of autumn. I revelled in the freshness and silence of the unawakened morning, and I could not believe, I did not want to believe, that this picturesque area might soon be a battlefield. Suddenly, on the right, about a kilometre away from us, explosions went off, machine gun bursts. The paratroopers, who were fuming mercilessly with makhorka, took shelter in their cells. My curiosity got the better of me. I turned my face in the direction from where the shots came, but the forest ledge blocked the way. A panting Gorbunov came running, sat down on the edge of the cell, lowered his feet in dirty boots, and ordered. All the headquarters. I turned on the radio and, contacting the battalion headquarters, handed the microphone to Gorbunov. Burka, I'm Najim. Yes, it's me, the third. On my right, some household has started a fight. Me and my boys are on a fence. Over. I switched the valve on the tube and listened. He raised his furry eyebrows in surprise. You don't know? Well, find out from the chief, I'll wait. He gave me back the receiver and said as long as the brigade headquarters is called, I'll be here nearby. If anything happens, call me. He climbed out, put binoculars to his eyes, waved his hand and disappeared somewhere. The shots rattled behind the forest. In about 3 minutes, the battalion headquarters called the third. Vovka, hurry up for the commander. I said, hearing Kubzev's voice in the receiver. Sochnev broke from his seat and jumped and ran towards the forest. Gorbunov appeared from behind a tree and stopped him with a shout. Here I am. They both went down into the cell. It was not even a cell, but a square pit with a niche in which the radio station was attached. Gorbunov, seized with anxiety, listened and said, Here it is once. That's the time. Scouts? Of course he sent them. Having finished the conversation, perplexed, he waved his hands. We don't know who's fighting who. No data. In the distance, at the edge of the field, loomed the figures of people in grey-green uniforms. Germans, burst out someone's exclamation. The paratroopers squeezed deeper into the ground, numbly watching what was happening. The Germans prowled along the coastal thickets, fell and fired in the direction of the forest, across the river and the highway, rose again, and strange things strove at all costs to make their way to the place from where the most shots came. Having crossed the river, they wet and wade down, ran along the highway, looking back and firing indiscriminately. Lowering his binoculars to his chest, Gorbunov said, Someone is chasing them. He climbed out of the hole and about 20 steps away from us lay down in the cell prepared for him. Commanded. To fight. The shots came closer, louder, more distinct. Together with the shots, the rumble of engines grew. All lurked, like hunters in their hiding places, not daring to move an arm, to move their necks. I looked at the approaching enemy with all my eyes, clutching my automatic rifle. I felt a sucking sensation under my spine, and my hair seemed to stand up under my helmet. I glanced at Sochnev. His face was dripping with sweat, his green eyes were unusually wide open, and his lips were trembling. And the rumble was getting closer and closer. An armoured personnel carrier burst out from behind the bend, its barrels gleamed on the side, and in the depths of the body angular helmets. Behind the armoured personnel carrier a bunch of Germans ran. Behind them ran a truck, packed to capacity with soldiers. Hitlerites also chased after it. The front grabbed the board and hung on their outstretched arms, dragging their legs along the highway. Disorderly column with noise, shouts, screams rushed past the paratroopers. I was thrown into a shiver. The hardest thing is to get close to the enemy without doing anything. With a tremendous effort of will I held myself back, so that prematurely, without command, not to pull the trigger, and looked impatiently at Gorbunov. After waiting some more, Gorbunov shouted, "Fire." The deafening crackle of bursts hit my ears, the rumble of anti-tank guns. I tried to shoot as calmly as possible. Grenades flew, kicking up columns of dust and smoke on the highway. Iron rattled. I got a splash of earth in my face, knocked down from the barrier by bullets, and my eyes were clogged. I sat down, blinked, and continued shooting. Sochnev, carried away by the battle, discharged the already hot machine gun in long bursts, and in a thick bass was cursing all the gods and shouting curses. The barrage of fire threw both cars to the river. Hitlerites dazedly jumped out of the body and fell to the ground, clinging to every bump, every hillock to somehow take cover. The armoured truck went up in flames, continued to skid toward the water, dragging a black plume of smoke behind it, and suddenly exploded. Thick clouds of smoke covered the road. The Germans rushed across the river into the field. Some could still run, others, exhausted, barely dragged their feet, looking for salvation behind the trunks of lonely oaks. "Take care of your cartridges," warned Gorbunov. Little by little the shots subsided, and in a few minutes it was all over. On the roadside, tilted, stood a mangled truck, the wreckage of an armoured personnel carrier, scattered on the gentle slope on the highway. In the bushes, in the water, lay the corpses of German soldiers. Smoke in layers, silently rippling, rose above the ground. In the pit Gorbunov fell in with us, said, "Not many people have carried their legs away." Well, HQ. After the rumble and noise, my head was buzzing and my ears were ringing. Contacting the main station, I did not recognize my voice and could not make out which of the radio operators was talking to me. Gorbunov reported to the headquarters about the completion of the task, told us to wrap up the station and left, and only then I noticed that Sochnev was spitting blood and licking his cut lip. "When did you get a hole?" Sochnev smiled miserably. "Ah, nothing. It'll heal before the wedding." The avalanche of people stretched towards the forest. Came the scouts. They were surrounded by paratroopers. Sochnev and I crawled out of the hole, threw our packs on our backs and hurried over there. In the crowd that had formed there were people dressed in non-military clothes. To Gorbunov stepped an elderly man in a short dark coat, in a cap with a scarlet ribbon on the visor, with an automatic rifle thrown back, and shaking his long oak-lady beard, introduced himself. Commander of the partisan detachment Solochenko. Spreading his arms, he took another step and hugged Gorbunov tightly. I was sure that I would meet our regular units. With frank amazement I considered the partisans. How much has been read about them? People's Avengers, as they were called in the newspapers, were in my mind people extraordinary. They blew up bridges, derailed trains, destroyed enemy garrisons, dealt with traitors. When I read about it, each of the partisans seemed to me a huge man, bravely confronting a strong enemy. And here they are, these heroes ordinary, our heroes. Some of them are not pretty, but they are still heroes. More guerrillas came, and in their turn they looked at us, paratroopers greeting and hugging us with admiration and joy. In a minute both of them willingly exchanged makorka and samosad, bread, sugar and lard. A white-headed boy of about 15, with burned-out eyebrows, in a patched coat with a wide belt, stopped in front of me. "We also have a radio." "And who do you keep in touch with, if it's no secret?" Sotnev smiled at him, holding his lip with a gauze swab. "No one. The food has gone bad. The whole detachment on only scouts hold on." I involuntarily grinned. "Where did you get such knowledge?" Are you a radio operator? Not me, my older sister Anka. She's sitting idle. You could give us some batteries, eh? Rubbing the kid's shoulders, I said. We can't now, but we'll drop them off for sure. In a clearing, surrounded by tall pines, they buried the dead. They lowered them into one mass grave. Silence hung over the crowd, only the tinkling of shovels against the stones and the earth falling with a soft clatter. Gorbunov and Solochenko, squeezed to the edge of the grave, bared their heads. In the distance, by the yellow thickets, stood guarded by 3 Germans, fearfully hiding their eyes. Their faces seemed dead pale. Pulling me by the sleeve, Sochnev nodded, and we got out of the crowd. A paratrooper with a bandaged head was half lying on the stale grass. His comrade, kneeling, was showing some photographs. Shall we have a look? Sochnev suggested. The wounded paratrooper heard and said, Look, everybody look. Those were terrible pictures. On the gallows, 5 bodies in torn underwear. A little to the side, under the gallows, are German youths with machine guns on their chests, their sleeves rolled up to the elbow, their caps on backwards. They are cheerfully looking straight into the lens, posing proudly and picturesquely. Another picture, the execution of women and children. Completely naked, they stand on the edge of the pit with faces frozen with horror and weight. Soldiers are not visible. They are behind the frame. But here they are walking in disorder, firing machine guns in cold blood. Victims are falling, crawling, mothers are covering their children. I was scared, more scared than I was in the battle. I had assumed before that I would feel the deaths of my comrades. But that's what war is all about in war. Rarely a battle is without casualties. Sometimes thinking about it, clenching my heart into a fist in advance, I accepted future sacrifices as inevitable. But I could not comprehend why children, women, old people should die. Why? Ogres. Monsters, the wounded man shouted angrily, threw the pictures away from him, grabbed his automatic rifle and fired the German in the bushes. Waving his arms, fell flat on his back. The other 2 recoiled in deathly fright. Suddenly, and inappropriately sounded this shout, and shot the paratroopers, and partisans shuddered, raising their heads incomprehensibly from the grave. Gorbunov rushed to the wounded man. What have you done, my little dove? You know that this is not our custom. The wounded man raised himself on an elbow, pointed at the photographs, shouted defiantly, Is this the custom? The paratroopers were silent, furrowing their brows. The selected photos were passed from hand to hand, faces stern, fingers clenched into fists. Gorbunov stepped forward and said, My friends, none of the executioners will escape retribution. But understand, we are obliged to transport these people to the big land. We need them alive there. We'll send photos as a document to denounce them. Understood? Prepare to move. The familiar command somewhat sobered the men, and they sluggishly began to disperse, grouping themselves into squads and platoons. Part of the way the company and the squad went together. I rubbed a blister and limped on my right foot. I heard Gorbunov negotiating with Solochenko about a meeting. Can we go straight to our headquarters? I can't. I don't have the whole squad here. Besides, we have to keep the road in our sights. The Germans are taking ammunition and food to the Dnieper. All right, I won't insist, Gorbunov agreed. You'll send a liaison to us as agreed. But you, my dear fellow, at least tell us about yourself. Please, in a nutshell. At the beginning of the war, one was a Red Army rifleman. Got surrounded near Kharkov. Barely escaped capture. I returned to the village of Sinyavka. I used to work there as a collective farm chairman. I set up an underground group, and later a partisan detachment. The communist, 23 years old. I'll tell you more about it the next time we meet. There's a turn-off by those pine trees over there. We'll go that way. Saying goodbye, they shook hands firmly. A burning pain in my leg kept me awake. I hoped that Gorbunov would call a halt, but he saw the party off and said, Slowly, 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 closer and closer to home. There we will rest properly. It became unbearable to walk. Give me the package, I'll carry it, Sokhnev offered. No way. It's up to you. Change your shoes. Will it take long? I waddled out of the formation. I found a bump, sat down, took off my boot. My foot was covered in blood. The trailing men were passing by, talking to each other. I changed my shoes and was about to catch up with the company as someone came out of the bushes on the road, hidden from me by branches. The place was deaf. Sensing something wrong, I slightly pushed the branches apart and saw a short German in a mud-soaked overcoat on the road. He was breathing hard and looking around fearfully. Kiryuka Badabum, 26.05.2024 840. His automatic rifle hung slantingly, barrel downward, on his chest. His helmet was pulled down to the back of his head. The belt on his belly sagged under the weight of the holster. I was stunned. The blood rushed to my temples. But it was only a moment. The next moment I threw forward the barrel of my automatic and shouted loudly, "Hände hoch." The German sat down with a groan, stared with unblinking eyes at the bushes behind which I was sitting, straightened his back, and tentatively pulled his hands up. "Hände hoch," I repeated more insistently, coming out from behind the bushes. With his arms raised, the German stretched out in a string. A gloating grin suddenly appeared on his chalky pale face. I stepped onto the road, and at the same moment a sharp blow on the head from behind knocked me off my feet. When I woke up, there were two men beside me, the one I had taken at gunpoint, and the other, a tall man in an overcoat unbuttoned to the waist, with a bloody abrasion on his face from ear to lip. The big man held my automatic and a Finnish knife. I moved my shoulders. I had my walkie-talkie with me. Vovka without a radio, I thought in despair. The Germans made me get up. They led me up. This is captivity. Cold needles pierced my body. What was a bloody blister on my foot compared to them? The narrow back of a German in a dirty overcoat swayed before my eyes. I tried to walk slower. The big man was hurrying me, pushing me from behind with his machine gun. My mind was working feverishly. Should I rush and hide behind the trees? The bullets would catch up with me as soon as I took a step. Pounce on the front man and finish him off. That would be my end too. The big man would shoot. Look for a way out. The German stopped and turned toward me. I saw the young man's face, the big blue eyes, the smooth forehead, the neat nose, the soft lips, and the rounded chin touched with fuzz. He, too, looked at me for a while, then smiled wickedly, took off his satchel and put it on me. The big guy mumbled approvingly and hung his satchel on me. It wasn't heaviness that weighed down on my body. No, it was hatred for these people that rumbled in my chest, ready to burst out. Mocked, how exquisitely mocked. The big man nodded expressively, and we continued on our way in the same order. A small clearing opened up. On its opposite side stood a wall of pine trees, motionless and calm. A fluffy green branch swayed overhead, and a grey woodpecker, rhythmically waving its red head, chiseled the bark with its beak. The Germans scrutinized the clearing. The tall German pushed me forward, and after a while I heard their heavy footsteps behind me. 2 shots rang out, which threw me into a daze. I felt no pain, but unaccountably, by the edge of my ear, I heard the soft thud of something heavy on the ground, a long groan. No, it was not me who was shot. I'm alive. I turned sharply with my whole body and could not believe my eyes. The young German, face down on a bump, was lying belly down and convulsively scratching the dry grass with his curled fingers. The breathless big man was sprawled beside me, his face with a bloody abrasion frozen in a viciously painful grin. With the swiftness of a cat, I tore off my German satchel, grabbed my automatic rifle from the ground, took a knife out of the German's pocket, and was about to rush into the woods when men in stained camouflage coats appeared at the edge of the clearing. I was seized with unbridled joy when among these people I saw the Bogutar Igorov. Tears came. They accumulated in the corners of my eyes and dripped down my cheeks. I wiped them with the sleeve of my overalls, but the tears flowed and flowed. Waving the floors, Igorov first came up to me, examined me from head to toe, wiggled his moustache, and suddenly rolled me a slap. "Don't get caught." At first I was confused, not understanding why Igorov hit me, but in the next second the meaning of what he said reached my consciousness, and I thought so I deserve it. Kiryuka Badabum, 26.05.2024 8:40. Egorov no longer paid attention to me and searched the dead. I headed towards the forest. "Where to?" shouted Igorov. "Air young and green. They'll catch us like kittens alone. If you are in the story, so hold on to us." Together with the scouts, I caught up with the company. "Long time you were not there, met me Sokshnev. We were already taking a break. What happened to your cheek? Where did you colour yourself?" I was ashamed to admit what happened. No reason. I tripped. Solochenko's detachment was reported to the brigade headquarters. Without leaving the dugout, Savinov spent 2 hours doing nothing but deciphering and coding reports. We received a radiogram established constant communication with the detachment of Batya, act in concert. "Another Batya showed up," said Nikishchenko. "It turns out that the headquarters of the partisans know more about the guerrillas than we do." Solochenko was modest, did not tell Gorbunov what is the name of his unit. The next day, with a group of paratroopers and with contacts of the detachment, went to the partisans Vasily Kobzev. Left instead of him, I became a member in the headquarters dugout at any time of day or night. With headphones on my head, I sat at the radio station and, looking through the open door at the net of fine rain, waited for Komisarov. He appeared just before the beginning of the communication session and sat down tiredly on the couch. I tuned the station to a new wave and in a minute or two caught my call signs on the air. Kobzev's voice, distant, muffled, came as if from under the ground. Komisarov listened. I turned the earpiece to him and suggested, "We'll have to switch to Morse code." "Switch." "Oh." The signals transmitted by Kobzev in Morse code sounded loud and clear. I easily and quickly wrote down 3 rows of numbers. Komisarov turned the radiogram in his hands and handed it to Savinov, who appeared in the dugout and immediately began to decipher it. Nikishchenko came in, followed by an officer in a wet raincoat. "Report," asked Nikishchenko, sitting down on the seat, warningly vacated by Komisarov, and pushing away from himself in the middle of the table smoker, made from the shell casing of a Patarov cartridge. The officer threw off his hood, opened his chaff, splashing drops, extracted a map from his clipboard. Operation completed as written. The bridge was blown up. A supply wagon was captured on the road. "Did they bring anything with them?" asked Nikishenko. "With food we are tight." "Brought." "What do you mean?" "Broke off the horses, harnessed, loaded bags of flour, sugar, cereals enough for the first case." "Thank you." "Thank you, thank you." "Listen further," the officer turned gloomy. "Twice my men ran into the Germans, and all on the outskirts of our forest. Something suspicious. I have the impression that the enemy is pulling up forces." "We'll take note thoughtfully," said Nikishchenko. "Let's wait to see what will bring scouts. Do you hear, Savinov?" "Of course." And another unpleasant report. With these words, Savinov gave decoded radiogram from the partisan detachment. After reading it, Nikishenko with a sigh said, "And there then, the same thing. Wide take. Scouts still wait, will understand everything and report to the brigade headquarters." Komisarov leaned toward me. "Go, Tarasov, take a walk, or you may fall asleep at night. I'll be on watch." I reluctantly left the dugout, resenting the platoon for not letting me listen to the conversation to the end. It had stopped raining, but the sky was still covered with a dense veil of low clouds. The lights of fires shone through the trees people were cooking. Near my tent I saw Goshka Popov's green cloak tent hung on stakes. He had just returned from a mission. Limping badly, I hurriedly walked to the hut. I was tempted to hear the details firsthand, and at the same time to let Goshka know about the impending danger. Kiryuka Badabum, 26.05.2024-840. My feet were sticking out of the hole in dirty boots with their toes down. At the entrance I kicked at the soles of my feet, and with all my body piled on Popov. Alive? Don Quixote. Give me your paw. Popov quickly twisted and, finding himself on his side, gave me a bony hand. Scared me to death, you idiot. Spit it out, how are you there? I paused, noticing a black dugout under the branches in the corner. A shovel and a hunting cartridge case were lying on a mound of earth. Goshka, what is this? Sighing and sniffing, Popov was silent for a long time, and finally answered with unnatural indifference. Only foolishness, of course. It's shameful to say. There is a belief that if this thing is buried, everything will be lucky. Really? I didn't know that. I jokingly remarked, beginning to guess that Goshka brought something. Show me this magic thing. The cartridge case was in my hands before Popov reached it, leather well made with loaded cartridges. I drew my rifle from its sheath, and with the blade I forged the cardboard wadding. Gold dental crowns spilled out of the cartridge, and some of them had roots with traces of dried blood sticking out of them. I jerked my hand away like a stung man, the yellow metal scattering all over the tent. Look, it's really gold. Popov marvelled, goggling his eyes. Now, if you put it this way or that way, it's all my fault. Our eyes met. Popov fidgeted on the dry branches, as if he had sat on a hedgehog, and looked at me with a wary and ingratiating expression, and his whole look said that he feared further explanation. I could not utter a word, amazed at what I had seen and at the fact that Goshka was so shamelessly deceiving me. It had never occurred to me that he was capable of it. The silence was getting heavy, and I said, There was Goshka Popov, but he's all out. You know what happens for this kind of thing? Friends whom you deceived hit you in the face, and the tribunal puts you against the wall. It wasn't me who pulled those teeth, Popov spoke passionately. I took the cartridge case off the dead German. I couldn't throw it away. And you decided to hide it. You wanted to bury the traces of someone else's crime, and your conscience too. That's how it happened. The hell I did. There was so much genuine suffering and remorse in his eyes that I, softened, unexpectedly offered myself. I'll tell you what I didn't see or hear anything. You take this to headquarters. Today. Understood? Popov's face was flaming, his eyes glittering. That's how I left him. The paratroopers who returned from the raid were drying their shirts, uniforms and pants over the fires. I waddled to the nearest fire, the biggest one, to find out the latest news. A couple more such sorties, and all the ammunition will be used up, said a stocky, sullen soldier in an undershirt and pants with loose straps, covered with a cloak tent. Fritz is completely furious. He is snapping ferociously. It seems that ours had been hit hard over the Dnieper. The soldiers parted, letting Dorokin closer to the fire. The glow of the flames played on his wet leather jacket. That's right, comrade. The Germans have been squeezed out. Dorokin shivered, stretched out his hands to the fire. Paratroopers from neighbouring fires were coming up. Hitlerites were preparing to delay the Red Army's offensive, gaining a foothold on the right bank of the Dnieper and stabilise the front line. And here in the rear appears our paratroopers. With our support, guerrilla units are more active. The rear is disorganised, ammunition and food are delivered to the front with interruptions. You can judge for yourself, how can they not snap back if their plans fall apart? I'll show you a curious document. Dorokin took a leaflet out of his clipboard. This is an order of the German command, reproduced in Russian and Ukrainian languages. Its essence: everyone who will help to catch a Soviet paratrooper will receive a cash reward of 10,000 marks. Kiryuka Badabum, 26.05.2024-840. A black, gypsy-looking guy with a long goat's leg in his teeth, squatting and squinting from the smoke, was listening to the deputy, waving his shirt over the fire, and not noticing that it was already burning. Hey you, sniffing the air, the sullen soldier woke up. You'll soon catch fire yourself. They won't give you 5 marks for stale. The gypsy jerked his hands away, trampled on his loincloth. A light chuckle escaped. Don't worry. I won't let you take either the stale or the whole one in your hands, he said, continuing to smoke a cigarette. And that's good and order. It means that the devil has been stepped on, if he has set such a price. He's afraid lest they break his horns. Unknowingly, the gypsy threw a pebble into my garden. He touched the captivity and mentioned the blister. My cheeks burned, my hands became redundant for some reason. But everyone's faces were tinted by the flames of the fire, and no one paid any attention to me. Yes, of course he is afraid, agreed Dorokin. Soon, guys, and break the horns and pin the tail. There's not enough smoke, put in the gypsy, and with a wistful look handed a goat's leg to his neighbour. 1 for 10 louts. What's good for some, but a bath for the louse, said the sullen soldier. You'd better talk about ammunition. Soon there will be nothing to load the machine guns with. We're running out of food. There will be ammunition, food and tobacco, promised Dorokin. But don't get discouraged. We paratroopers don't deserve it. More life. We can do it. If so, replied Sullen. The scouts appeared from the forest. They were recognized at once by their stained coats. With them was a man in a grey jacket, black pants, German boots. A red beard on a haggard pale face without wrinkles made it difficult to determine his age. He looked like an old man and not an old man. As he approached us, the alien exclaimed joyfully, "Hello, good people. We have been waiting for you for 3 years." People answered in different ways, nodding, looking at the old man with curiosity. "There's no time, father, let's go," asked the young scout. Dorokin followed them. Anticipating that the old man will be taken to the headquarters, I hurried, overtook them, and, having come to the dugout, took my place at the radio station. "I've taken one thing off your mind," said Komisarov. "What?" Worked with the brigade, contacted the detachment. "Tomorrow Kobzev will come, we'll decide how to proceed." "Yes, I almost forgot. Popov is a good man. The sappers praise him. He acted on a par with them and showed himself to the best advantage. Well, have a good day." Komisarov left. Goshka was not in the headquarters, I noted to myself. I'll have to report tomorrow. Nikishchenko was lying on the bed, putting his palms under his head and covering his eyes. He did not feel well. Old wounds whimpered in the bad weather. Savinov, sitting on a thick pine log, coded a report on the results of the day. I prepared forms, sharpened pencils, and waited for Savinov to finish in order to transmit the radiogram. There were approaching voices and stomping. Pulling back the tarpaulin, Dorokin and Igorov entered the dugout. Igorov threw his hand to his helmet. "Comrade Guards Captain," he turned to Nikishchenko, 3 kilometers from the camp detained an unknown man. He called himself Makar Sedletsky, a resident of the village of Dubki. Permission to deliver. Nikishchenko sat down. "Put your hand down. Under what circumstances detained?" Egorov took his hand away and told. "We were returning from a mission. We looked. A man with a bag was wandering through the forest, not on the road and not on the path, but so. He's wandering back and forth. Looks like he's lost or looking for someone. Then he goes straight to the camp. That's when we called out to him. When he saw us, he was happy. He was looking for us," he said. After listening to Igorov, Nikishchenko released him, telling him to bring the detainee, and lay down again. Kiryuka Badabum, 26.05.2024 8:40. Completely collapsed. I would sooner join the brigade and into battle. All the disease would fly away. The old man came in timidly, looked around the dugout with a keen eye, took off his cap and said with a broad smile, "It was hard to find you. My feet are not mine. I've been wandering in the forest for 3 days. I've been wandering in the woods for 3 days. If it weren't for the boys, I would still be walking." Rising on the bed, Nikishchenko interrupted him. "Daddy, you business to talk. How do you know about our existence and why we're looking for?" So how not to know? Everywhere have heard about you. The Germans are on the run, looking for you, suicide bombers. They promise big money for your capture. But that's why I was looking for you. The men sent me from Dubki. Go, they say, Makar, tell our men to go to Dubki immediately. The Germans are fed up. They've tormented us. We can't take it anymore. The old man became more and more belligerent. You can take our village in a heartbeat. Help, rescue from captivity, he said in a pitiful tone and wept. Nikishchenko softly said, Okay, Daddy, do not get upset. We know that under the German people live worse than ever. Better tell us what part is there. Having risen, Savinov pointed the old man to a chump with his hand and, standing behind his back, continued coding the report. With the sleeve of his jacket wiped away the tears from his cheeks, the old man sat down and answered cheerfully. SS Garrison, rabble of different kinds, underdog souls of 100 soldiers. There is a cannon and a tank, 3 machine guns. Distracted from the table, Savinov asked, What fortifications there are? The Germans dug trenches to the east, and their arse is uncovered. I wish we could hit it. All right. Thank you, Makar. Nikishenko questioningly looked at him. Makar Makarovich Sedletsky, said the old man. Let me spend the night at your place. I've got a terrible nuisance, and hunger is not a bad thing. Well, of course, on duty. Called Nikishenko. In the door appeared slender paratrooper with a machine gun. Escort this man, feed and organize for the night. Yes, take care. The comforts. The duty officer nodded understandingly and, letting the old man pass ahead, disappeared. Savinov, meanwhile, signed the radiogram, gave it to me and spread the map on the table, lifted the corner to see Nikishchenko. Let's clarify something. Everything that the old man said coincides with the intelligence. Savinov turned to face Dorokin. The enemy is pulling up its forces to the forest. I know, nodded Dorokin. Talked to the platoon commander. So Dubki the nearest settlement to us, continued Savinov. What is alarming is that the punitive units, worn out at the front, do not linger in the village, but bypass it, as if purposely leaving it for us. Thus, nothing, it would seem, does not prevent us to strike at Dubki and, while the enemy will understand the situation, have time to break the garrison there and take refuge in another forest, in the nearest. Here. What does the commander thinks? Maybe the enemy is just waiting for this, said Nikishenko. This forest is out of range of our battalion. Who is in the forest we do not know. It is possible that there are already Germans. If so, they will throw us away from Dubki to the hole behind the village. There's nowhere else to hide. There's nothing but fields and wasteland. And we'll be trapped. I am tormented by a question, is the old man really a walker, or is he hired to lure us to Dubki, or, at least, to fix our attention on them? The Germans are not fools, said Dorokin, and understand perfectly well that on the testimony of one civilian man we will not build a plan of operation. Most likely, the old man was sent to scout our exact location, and to Dubki they will drive us out themselves. Anyway, we can't let the old man go. For a long time I listened to the conversation of the officers. It was already late when Nikishchenko said, Kiryuka Badabum, 26.05.2024, 8:40. The morning is wiser than the evening. Let the old man rest in peace, and we, perhaps it's time to go. By the way, tomorrow we'll have Solochenko. He'll probably make it clear. This area is his domain. The dugout is empty. For me there came languid hours. I sat by the receiver and waited for a call. From time to time the main station gave a check signal, and again in the headphones only rustles and barely perceptible, as if flattened German babble. Nikishchenko slept without undressing, covered with a cloak tent, often turned from side to side and moaned. In order not to disturb him, I turned off the light and sat in the darkness, seeing in front of me only a scale with an arrow illuminated by a bulb under the cap. At midnight someone outside called the password, and the sentry uttered a recall. Moving the glass on my pocket flashlight, I turned on the green light. Unheard in the dugout snuck sleepy Sakshnev, jerked his shoulders, extinguished the attack of yawning. Without saying a word, he sat down to the radio station. I handed him the documents. I was awakened by rustling voices. I couldn't understand anything. Then I realized that Kobzev had returned from the partisans and was talking to Popov, who, lying on his side, with his back to me, touching me with his sharp elbow, was fumbling in his pocket. "Now I know where the partisans get such courage," Kobzev spoke. "They reason like this: we are not behind enemy lines, but the enemy is behind our lines. On the contrary, to understand, and rightly so. And it's the enemy who should be afraid, not us. That's how they are, brother, and they're beating the Germans up all the time. I was in the detachment one day, and I heard and saw all sorts of things. The partisans blew up a train with equipment and blew up a bridge. Well, a bridge like that. We won't need it for the first time. Understand?" "What's not to understand?" Popov agreed. "We blew up the bridge together. I was personally present at that." "No way." "Wow," Kobzev was surprised.